Good morning, everyone. Good morning, y'all. Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for your patience as we clumsily try and get this new room set up and all of our AV woes solved right in front of y'all. For anyone who wasn't here yesterday, my name is Benno Thomas. I'll be your Master of Ceremonies today. I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I did 8 years active duty. I got out in 2011. And for anyone who knows what the term means, I was a recon Marine. I graduated sniper school in 2008. And I now have pivoted hard to working with veterans. I'm a senior student success advocate at the Pat Tillman Veterans Center, and while my work is much closer to a social worker position, I'm actually a trained journalist. I got done graduating from the Cronkite School just last year before PTVC made the silly dang choice of hiring me on full time. Thank you all for coming. With that, we'll officially kick off our second day of panels for the Veterans in Society Conference. Thanks for coming again, y'all. Let's do it. Welcome to Phoenix and welcome to ASU. Before we get there, actually, we've got a couple of thanks that I'd like to push out there. First, I'd like to greatly thank the National Endowment for Humanities for all the support that they've given us trying to plan this event, the College of Integrated Sciences and Arts, the Office of Veteran and Military Academic Engagement, the Pat Tillman Veterans Center, and of course, the Veteran Studies Association. Today, we're going to be continuing to learn from subject matter experts and champions in our field, further expanding upon the field of veteran studies. But first, I'd like to welcome to the mic someone who's going to kick off our whole day, the president of Veteran Studies Association, Dr. Mariana Grochowski. Thank you, Doctor.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you. Awesome. Well, welcome. Welcome to day 2 of the 5th Veteran in Societies Conference. On behalf of the Conference Planning Committee, we are genuinely so glad you are here in person, of course, but also online. I want to start off by saying thank you to Manu and Stacy and ASU for hosting us here and making our time together possible. This is genuinely so amazing. But thanks also to Jim Craig, Eric Hodges, and Bruce Pensick, members of the VSA Executive Board, as well as members of the VSA Advisory Board for helping make this conference possible. So thank you, everyone. Those of you that are joining us online, thank you so much for joining us virtually. We hope that you can join in on the conversation today on Twitter using the hashtag VIS2022PHX so that we can really grow and learn from each other as much as possible. We have a really full and exciting day of speakers and presentations about health, policy, resilience, pedagogy, performing arts, and many other topics, including the development and sustainability of the field of veteran studies. So we hope that you will take care of yourself today. Please eat carbs, stand up, walk around, because we really want you to stay with us until ASU kicks us out today around 5 or whatever it is. So I just hope that we will learn from one another, challenge and better one another through our conversations and contributions today, so we can continue to grow and expand our individual and collective efforts here in veteran advocacy and veteran studies. So thank you again very much for coming. Now let me introduce my colleague.
This is a really large screen. Can you all see me? No. Okay. So hi, my name is. Can you push the screen down? Oh, wow. Yeah. So hey, my name is Jim Craig. I'm on the executive board of the Veteran Studies Association, and I don't know. I was with some people last night. I am totally riding a high right now, because it's been about 4 years since this group has gotten together, and there are new people in this group, and you are my people, and I'm excited to be here with you in person. Thanks to ASU, OVMAE, to Manu and Stacy for putting this thing together. They committed to this thing 2 years, almost 3 years ago, not knowing what they're getting themselves into, and they've just put together something fantastic. So thank you very much. I'm the moderator for the first panel, so let's just get right into it. So the first panel is on resilience, and when ASU and Manu presented this idea to the VSA about what the topics for the next conference could be, two things popped out, and resilience was one of them. And it was because we were talking about this in the middle of a pandemic, and how are we going to be a society and a discipline when we have to figure out how to continue to move forward. And Manu, I can remember a time Manu said, look, this is what veterans do all the time. And so we can learn, I think, from our studies about to help ourselves. So that was the first one, and the other, he's really interested in his pedagogy, and that's like after my heart. So I'm excited about those two topics, plus you add veteran studies in there, and we're gonna have a great day. So we're gonna do resilience. We're gonna have three presenters or three presentations to start, and I'm gonna make sure I get all the names right. But they are gonna go a Veterans Resiliency Review by Rachel Larson and Amanda Strauss right here. Then we'll move on to Michael Logan, who will do Resilience Among Veterans, and then John will talk about humor and veterans and the possibilities of resilience. And when I just briefly talked to them about this, I said, oh, that's good. We're starting with all the hard stuff first and ending with the humor afterwards. And John was quick to tell me, oh no, the humor is a little rough too. So get ready for it. Presenters, you have 18 minutes. I'm going to not stand in the dunce seat over there. I'll go over here and I will have some cards or just get your attention. And then we'll have time at the end, if all goes well, for 20 to 25 minutes of conversation. So with that, you're up. And I think you could probably go from here if you want.
We could go from what? So PDF. How do we make that presentation? Sure, I'll let you do it. We can just go from the PDF, I guess. Mm-hmm. Then we'll have to scroll through the slides, I guess, or will the slide changer work? Oh, there we go. Thank you. Check, make sure this works. All right, appreciate it. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. Really excited to share our Veteran Resiliency Review project with all of you. It is an ongoing project, but we do have some preliminary stuff that we can share with you. So I'm Dr. Rachel Larson. I'm a lecturer and program director in the College of Health Solutions here at Arizona State. And then my colleague.
I'm Amanda Strauss. I'm a student in the College of Health Solutions, as well as an employee.
Yes, and Amanda is a program director too on a few of these veteran projects that we do. So we'll go ahead and just start off with kind of how this project started to form. We do a lot of work looking at the overall landscape of veterans in the state of Arizona specifically, and know that from the research, veterans account for about 20% of all suicides, even though they only make up about 9% of the overall population within the state. So through our research, we've found that, resilience through social support, secure attachment, community integration, and then some other modifiable preventive factors and addressing upstream social determinants of health, all reduce or lower the prevalence of suicidality. Also empowering veterans to kind of take charge of their health, we know has been shown to reduce suicide also. So what our project, the purpose was to
kind of examine a resilient veteran's life, to identify kind of what went well, what interventions would have been beneficial during, lived experiences or times of crisis. Identify what their experience was with navigating resources that have been available to them. So how easy were those resources to access? Did they even know about resources that were available to them? And then also identify any type of negative experiences that they had with resource navigation. So were there any barriers that they experienced at all? So in order to do this, what we did is we took the mortality review process. And that concept looks at all of the things that kind of factor into leading up to a person's death. And mortality review is then they go in and kind of interview the family or people that were close to that individual, and then, look at medical records. In order to do that, they identify a case, start a review committee, obtain, all the information on that individual, then choose the cases they want to review the cases, and then follow up with, different family members. So we took this concept and we adapted it for this project and said, okay, well, we want to, know all of these things, but we want to talk to the actual individual that had some lived experiences and see what helped them. So we identified multiple veterans within the state, established our own review committee, obtained case level information through phone screenings, and then chose certain cases to review with in-depth interviews. And then we've been reviewing the cases that we've done thus far, and there has been some follow-up with all the nominated veterans as well. But the goal is to really explore veteran suicide and resilience from the veteran's perspective.
Okay. So the intervention process involves collecting nominations. These were via jot form, which you can see an example of on the slide. Veterans were able to nominate themselves, or community members could nominate them. We had a total of 55 nominations with 3 duplicates. Using the nominations and minus the duplicates, we conducted phone screenings with the veterans and used this time to classify their level of resiliency. We did this using a resiliency workflow, which you'll see on the next slide, to determine whether or not they were fit to complete an in-depth interview. The in-depth interview goes into questions about their life and their experiences, some of which can be traumatic. We use this information to map out their life according to different stages and experiences, and use this to identify the results. So there were 52 nominations that we reached out to these veterans, and we completed 34 phone screenings. Of these 34, 27 were approved for an in-depth interview as they classified as I am resilient, which is the green and the first yellow category. These individuals were categorized as I am resilient, as they're doing well despite any and all experiences they have faced thus far. Individuals that were categorized as I will be resilient were individuals who could use assistance with connection to resources for their needs. Based on the individuals that were approved for an in-depth interview, we have completed 5 in-depth interviews so far, as well as life maps. Based on these initial in-depth interviews, we have identified 60% of the individuals have had a major health issue or a chronic condition. 60% have had legal issues and served jail time, and 60% have had strong support systems. And despite this, they were still classified as resilient. Intervention connections. We work with an organization called Be Connected, which has a plethora of resources available that they can connect veterans with to address any of their needs. 51 veterans out of the 52 nominations were able to be contacted by Be Connected and interacted with to see if they needed any help and assistance with any needs. 16 individuals reported having needs and needing assistance. For these individuals, they were able to report more than one need, so there were 21 needs identified total among these 16 individuals. For those individuals, we were able to provide 34 connections to different resources, as there are multiple connections provided for specific needs. Most of the veterans reported only having one need and were able to receive a resource for that need in particular. Many of the veterans also indicated that they were unaware of many of these resources prior to communicating with Be Connected staff. For future studies, this project is currently still in progress and will involve additional interviews to collect a larger sample for analysis. And this analysis will also involve looking into different needs and connections to identify the most commonly identified ones expressed by the population.
So we're also going to be implementing other projects and testing some other upstream solutions based on the suggestions that we get from some of these veteran interviews. And then also just looking at the common needs and connections and providing more resources in those particular areas. And then also working with some community partners to implement different interventions to improve overall health for veterans, service members, and their families. There's a few projects that we have ongoing right now in the areas of just transportation and food insecurity as well.
These are our references, and feel free to contact us. Thank you.
I'm going to take the moderator's prerogative. We have plenty of time, so if there are questions specific to this one that you want to start with, I'm happy to entertain those. Yeah, go ahead, ma'am.
I apologize if I wasn't listening very well. Can you help me see the connection? So it started off with, there was a mortality review process, and then there was, how did we get from that to the interviews, or to figure out who was capable? Because mortality means you're dead to me, so can you help me?
Yeah, so that's why we adapted the mortality review. We're not using the mortality review process, but we use kind of the same framework that they utilize in developing our framework and going in and actually interviewing the veteran themselves versus the veteran's, family members. So those that experienced, crisis or suicidality, but are now, seem to be resilient, those were individuals that we went to look to interview.
Thank you, thanks for helping me.
Yeah.
During the interview process, was there a line of discussion about whether VA benefits were being used or not?
Yes. The Be Connected support line staff interacted with the individuals to see what resources they had access to and if they were utilizing the VA resources available. And if they weren't, they were connected with VA resources in addition to other ones external to the VA.
That might be an issue, a number to track if it's not being tracked. Who is not using resources that exist that could help, to understand that.
Yep. Yeah, that is something that we're going to look at for sure.
Are there any papers or articles out there that are looking specifically at a mortality review as it relates to veteran suicide?
No, not that we've seen. We've looked at just the mortality review process in general, and we are working with the Arizona Coalition for Military Families and starting up a specific mortality review for veterans in the state of Arizona.
Okay, great.
But yeah, we wanted to just, again, use the framework and the idea or concept to start to get qualitative information from the veterans versus reading a bunch of papers and saying like, oh, this intervention is going to work in these communities. We're specifically also targeting some high-risk communities within the state. We've done created an index and identified 5 of the highest risk areas in the state of Arizona. So that's where we go in and get nominations from.
The air vent is a little hard to hear.
Oh, yes,
Sorry.
sorry.
Yeah, just stand on the other side of
Got it.
So kind of a follow up on the awareness question, are you asking how they became aware or what ways in which they are or not aware? So, are they finding out through print media or social media or word of mouth or print, mailings, like what's kind of preventing the awareness of that,
I don't think they're asking specifically how they became aware, yeah. But just asking for level of awareness and what resources they are aware of.
As well as which resources they have used in the past, to know whether or not it was able to assist them or not at that time.
Yeah. But that would be a good follow-up, so we know how to get the word out to them, so.
How do you make people aware if they're not aware?
Right,
Yeah.
yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
So I'm interested in actually the scale that you developed
Mhm.
from green, I am resilient, down to red, I will maybe someday be resilient. And I know it's in a paper somewhere, but
Mhm.
that didn't give me enough. How did you design that? And is there a model, is there a social work model that talks about resilience that you used, or is there an agreed upon definition of resilience?
We had a licensed professional counselor who conducted the phone screenings, and the initial phone screenings helped to model the different levels of resiliency to help establish which point classified them as I will be resilient versus I am resilient based on the way they interacted and the outcomes of their experiences.
Yeah, so the licensed clinical counselor developed the model, and that's
Is
what she
that
used.
something that's, I'm pleading ignorance on, is
Mhm.
that something that's normal, that scale, or is that something that the licensed counselor developed for this exercise?
She developed it off of other scales. Yeah. Mhm.
Go ahead, Mary, we have a few minutes.
I just want to say thanks for talking about veteran suicide and resiliency in a positive and non-deficit tone. So I appreciate you highlighting the resiliency
Yeah.
instead of the deficit.
Mhm.
Go ahead.
I wanted to respond to your question. So I separated from the military, and my out briefing, all I knew was about Red Cross. I didn't know anything about resources until I was one of those 60% jail and chronic health, and then homelessness. So I'm looking for resources. So that's how I found out, and I know a number of veterans. It took until they got in trouble or they couldn't take care of their health.
Yeah, so that's one, like if you could find out how they did find out about stuff they do know
Mhm.
and where the gap is, that could be really helpful.
Yeah.
So I was curious, how do you empower a veteran, those veterans that you're talking about? Why I ask that is because with the lacks of in resources, you can call like the VA hospital here. And one negative incident, you don't want to call back. And I know a number of veterans again. So those who have experienced those negative incidents, how do you empower those with?
That's a tough question, right? But what we were doing is an actual warm handoff to, through Be Connected, they have what are called navigators. And that navigator, we introduced them to the navigator and then had them start talking and asking about resources. So it was a warm handoff versus just saying, here, call this number. And that was our effort to make sure that they were connected. So.
I'll chime in on that because I'm going to touch on some things about how veterans share information when I get up there. But Dr. Michael Wright here, when I got to my current institution, University of Texas at San Antonio, I had been out about 16 years and was not using any resources of any kind. And then I ran into Dr. Wright and one of our other colleagues, Will Lansden, who were familiar with kind of the trust issue, I think is the best way to put it, with veterans trusting the VA after hearing all the stories from probably some other folks didn't have great experiences with them. And so what they did is they brought the resources to where the veterans were. So we had VA social workers coming to campus to be able to actually sit down and have one-on-one conversations with veterans that had concerns or questions or needed help navigating the process. And so that was my introduction, and I actually got enrolled in VA Health after having access to that person that was there specifically for me. That I'd have to go somewhere and interact with them, and that's kind of grown into something, realizing that really trust is the big thing, that the veteran has to trust that the person they're talking to, because it's difficult to disclose some of those things. But really kind of community building, because that comes with the trust building. So what we've taken is programs like what Dr. Wright and Will started, and expanded into kind of almost mixers, like Coffee with Vets, where we bring in resources from the community to include VA, to include other community mental health resources like Endeavors, and other, also all sorts of other things. And we found that having the veterans being able to interact with representatives of these resource VSOs in a casual environment really builds the trust, because even though they may not either acknowledge or need the resource immediately, if they need it 6 to 12 months down the road, they'll remember, hey, I talked to Dave a couple months ago about this thing, and I'm feeling a certain way, so now I need to, let me go talk to him because I know him, I've met him, I've seen him. And that seems to be, at least in our case, how we've been able to get more longitudinal interaction instead of just one experience. I didn't like having to wait in the waiting room, or I couldn't afford to lose a half a day at work, and then they just break off from the process entirely. And it seems to have worked really well, at least in our case, doing that. But I mean, that's a lot of work to do that community building piece.
Yes.
I
And-
wanted to respond to your question about who's using their benefits. The Office of Minority and Health has done that research, so if you go to their webpage, you can find it there.
All right, so we will have time, more questions afterwards, after we're done, but Michael, your voice is warmed up, so.
All right. All right, let's see here. Nope. Over here? No? Yes. It's back there somewhere? All right, there. That's me. And that is me. All right, so what do I want to do? Top right, top left, top right? Start from the beginning. All right, so that picture that's fading out, that was me in my handsome days. It was about a third less of me. So I'll just start by asking a question, or actually a couple of questions. First, I'll get over here by the microphone. How many veterans in the audience? How many family members? Any Tupac fans? All right, he's going to get brought up here. So just an overview, quick overview of what I'm going to go through. Sense of belonging. Why do we care about sense of belonging? What the literature says about that. And there is a very strong correlation to resiliency, by the way, with sense of belonging. Theoretical framework for sense of belonging for student veterans. Conceptual framework, the main influences that affect sense of belonging, and then some conclusions that we can draw from a study that was conducted at our university on our student veterans. Remote, I like it. All right, quick question. Does anybody know why the Swedish Navy puts barcodes on the sides of their ships? Nobody? So they can scan the Navy in. I'll sit down. Sorry. I had to. Okay, so sense of belonging is a construct that's based on the interdependent relationship between individuals and group engagement. And it generally serves as a motivator for positive behavior. So sense of belonging is linked on multiple levels with behavioral and emotional components of engagement. So why do we care? because resilient individuals feel a deep sense of belonging, trust, and security. And here's my two-part question. Anybody recognize where that picture comes from? So he has a book of poems out, and and it's called "The Concrete" or "The Rose That Grew from Concrete," and that particular poem is about resilience, not about veterans, but the concept I think translates well. So veterans or people with a high sense of belonging feel like they're a part of something bigger than themselves, and that what they do matters. And belonging is one of the most important traits of resiliency. So one of the takeaways from "The Rose That Grew from Concrete" is, though we are products of our environment, we still have the choice to grow or be restricted by environmental limitations. Okay, so I'm going to save y'all a whole lot of time by giving you this graphic of a very intensive literature review of sense of belonging and all of the components that interact with it. So you can see there that there's, and this is specific to student veterans, so you see a lot of things there: student validation by institutional agents, which later on I'll talk about how that's probably the most important component. But some of these are one directional, some of these engage with each other and affect each other. And then when we look back to the first panel presentation that we had yesterday, it seems like the goal of most transition programs, including the TAP program, is employability. And so since money drives everything, we can see that there is a direct connection between all of these different factors and later on the latent constructs and a veteran's success both in school and post-graduation. So theoretical framework. The concept that I used for sense of belonging and the scale that I used were pretty much derived from these main theories, right? So Tinto student departure theory. That's pretty seminal theory, and there are some positives and there are some negatives to it. Some of the negatives have been discussed even by Tinto himself. Rendon's validation theory, I actually took a class with Dr. Rendon, and I was very resistant when I started taking that class because the way that validation was presented to me, I felt would be interpreted as disingenuous by veterans. And then the further I kind of got into the process, I realized validation theory is, pardon the pun, valid. You just have to adjust it. And it was designed for the Latino population and underserved students, which, depending on how you look at veterans, are an underserved category. And so with a little bit of adjustment, validation theory actually becomes one of the most important parts. And of course, Schlossberg's transition theory, but we did transition yesterday, so I won't bore you with that. Social capital, but social capital not in the sense of going to college helps you build social capital, but the social capital that you bring in from the military. Student engagement is a big one. I know there's a common misconception out there that that veterans don't engage in traditional campus activities and with other students. And veterans actually do engage. They're very engaged. They just engage in very different ways for a variety of reasons. And of course, financial circumstances, because money drives everything, including all problems. So the conceptual framework. Here you can see those four latent constructs: the student validation by institutional agents, social capital, student engagement, and financial circumstances. Those were kind of established in the literature through a variety of other studies as having an impact on sense of belonging. Military service characteristics, not really quantitatively. There's a lot of qualitative out there where you got some vets getting interviewed and, how do you feel about being here and doing what you're doing kind of thing. But never really having military service characteristics put up against these other latent constructs in a quantitative study. So having done the study, and run, for those of you that are really interested in the nerd part of it, running some principal components analysis to see out of 156 different possible variables, which ones really were good predictors of sense of belonging, either positively or negatively. And so faculty validation in class was the one that was overwhelmingly at the top of the list, which means that if a student veteran has or experiences a microaggression or feels like they're somehow not being included or respected by the faculty member in the class, you've lost them. So no matter what other interventions that you have, what other support structures that you have, they're probably going to withdraw, not technically, but withdraw from engaging with any of these other kinds of programs or interventions because they felt that they were being marginalized or felt that they weren't being validated in the classroom. So we talk a lot about the Billy Madison effect, where the student veterans feel like, I'm going to be the oldest guy in the class or the oldest person in the class. And we focus on how maybe the issue is that I'm not going to be able to relate to or engage with my peers. But the result of this study was that is not the issue. The issue is whether or not they feel validated by the faculty member. Of course, mentorship, we talked a little bit about that in the panel discussion yesterday. Faculty validation outside of class, still important, not as important as in class, but on the list. Engagement, that's a big one. And with veterans specifically, I need to look at them as a categorically non-traditional population that have other obligations like perhaps jobs, family obligations. If they have any kind of medical or mental health issues, they're having to go to appointments. So engagement is really about learning how to meet the veterans where they are instead of expecting them to show up to where the traditional population is directed to, like the president's barbecue and things of that nature. Interestingly, I'll throw this one in there. We asked some random questions just to get a better idea of literally where our veterans are, and the vast majority of them on our campus live more than 10 miles away from campus, which explains why when they come to campus, they come to class, and then they leave. They're not going to come back. They're not going to fight traffic 10 miles of rush hour to come back and have some substandard catered barbecue that the other students that live on campus are going to be happy to do, because for them it's a walk across the quad to get there. So that was just an interesting anecdote that kind of drove, it's not that veterans aren't engaging, it's that we have to understand how to engage with them and meet them where they are. Of course, social capital. So the veterans are very keen on feeling like their experience and their leadership traits and self-discipline and things of that nature are recognized and validated by both faculty and their peers. And of course, support services, which we just got done talking about some of those. So I kind of went over all of this, but very briefly, inclusion in the classroom and activities and discussions is very important. Student veterans are selective about who they engage with. So one of the questions that we asked about engagement was, are you engaging one-on-one with people, or are you engaging with organizations? And veterans are not really going out of their way to engage one-on-one with non-vets. In fact, when they seek out engagement opportunities, it tends to be with a group or an organization, which indicates that veterans are probably seeking out other veterans to socialize with. And the best way to do that is to find a veteran group. Cultural competency is a two-way street. So at the University of Texas at San Antonio, we don't treat cultural competency as having to educate faculty and staff about veteran culture so that they know how to interact with veterans. That's only half of the equation. The other half is teaching veterans how to live in this new world that they're in, because let's face it, the transition from military to post-military life is already a big one, but it's similarly a big transition for anyone, veteran or non-veteran, from the real world into higher education, because that's its own thing. And then substantive support services are important. But in order to know what those are, you need to ask the veterans. You need to conduct regular needs assessments, probably stand up a military-affiliated student council, but have some form of ongoing engagement with your veteran population so that we can stay literally on the bleeding edge of what is necessary to provide the best wraparound support services. So after conducting the study, and you remember the conceptual framework, which had the 4 latent constructs, and then the military service characteristics kind of up there, and we wanted to see if those identity components moved around when you added in the military service. So the conclusion really was that veterans are veterans first. Veterans are a very deeply diverse population. We are not monolithic, even though the media tends to portray the dude bro aspects of everything. And to give you an idea, at least at UTSA, and I'm sure it's similar in other institutions, proportionally we have more women vets using educational benefits than male vets. So the way veterans see themselves through their intersectional identities is through the lens of being a veteran. So it turned out that military service did not load as a separate latent construct of identity. Military service is the lens through which a veteran sees all of the other components of their identity and the latent and how they experience those latent constructs. So institutionally, when trying to stand up a mentorship program or think about engagement, or conceptualize how to validate social capital and provide support services, it's important to recognize the diversity of the student veteran population, but also understand that veteran is actually a culture and not a job status. And so by taking that approach, there's things that start making a lot more sense, right? So some of the institutional resources that exist might already be in place for things like first-generation students, certain minority groups, but nothing really for veterans. And then when you approach leadership about it and you talk about, well, we'd like to see some of these resources made available for veterans specifically, well, these things already exist. Doing it for veterans would duplicate it. Well, not necessarily, because you're going to need to adjust these programs and these forms of engagement to recognize that veterans are veterans first and everything else second. So there we are, we're popping smoke. We're at the end here. I didn't bore you all with a lot of the numbers, but if you're interested in kind of digging down into the methodology and some of the analyses that were done to arrive at the new revised model of sense of belonging, I'm happy to discuss that with you all offline. I'm sure our contact information will be passed around at some point. But that's it. That's all I got.
So we have 5 minutes, if we have a couple of quick ones, and if you don't, I got 10. So, yeah.
Hi, a question about mentorship.
Sure.
What suggestions would you make regarding establishing a mentorship relationship with a student veteran?
Well, through a lot of trial and error, the conclusion that we have arrived at is that it's important that the information and the mentorship come from veterans with leadership experience. So we're actually in the process of piloting a program, the Military Community Ambassador Program, MCAs, and that's actually funded through grants from the National Vet Leadership Foundation. And we're purposely interviewing and hiring veterans that have had leadership positions in the military, because we already know that they've had to have conversations with their E1s and E2s about going and buying that car off campus at 75% interest rate and things of that nature. And so we really want to get folks that have had mentorship roles through their leadership positions in the military, and then, of course, provide training for them in how to address and identify, kind of triage certain things, so that the mentors aren't necessarily case managers. They're kind of points of entry into the system, kind of the big brother program, big sister program. And then they're able to conduct those warm handoffs to the different resources that are available on campus. So again, mentorship to be successful is all about building trust and building community.
Just quick.
Sure.
To reflect back what you said, you are borrowing but not necessarily duplicating aspects of a chain of command relationship.
Correct. In fact, it's funny that you put it that way, because we've actually, as part of our efforts to transition vets, we create crosswalks that kind of create equivalencies between military ranks and positions in higher ed, so that someone understands the difference between a department chair and associate dean, because a lot of times they don't. And so they're walking this form around going, I don't know who that is, but I need one of y'all doctors to sign this. So we have created that, and the unintended consequence is that when we created that crosswalk, it started getting borrowed by the National Security Collaboration Center, so that they could understand if they were having certain, like GS or SES people coming to visit them for whatever business they're doing, that they would have the appropriate level university official on hand. So they knew, is this a dean thing? Is this a vice president thing? Does the president need to be there? So the consequence went well beyond mentoring veterans and into the larger community about how the institution itself engages with the military at large.
Okay.
Thank you so much for this.
By the way, say your name so we can all get to know each other a little bit.
Yeah. My name is Carrie Carter. Thank you so much for sharing this. I think the faculty validation and class piece is really interesting. I know that sometimes the decision to disclose their veteran identity in the higher education environment is a tricky one, because there's this, potential fear of, retribution or how people feel about you in an environment. And so sometimes when we do student veteran research, we recruit the students that are involved in the Student Veteran Center. So I was wondering if you looked at that in relation to, the participants in your study, and if you think there might be a difference among those student veterans who are harder to reach in the higher education environment because they're not connected, like, would those people be as motivated by the desire for the faculty member to identify them, or might there be like a reciprocal interaction where they wouldn't want to be, recognized?
So, a couple of things on that one. First, I'll point out that we intentionally track also who our faculty and staff, who our veterans are, so that we know who they are, so when we're dealing with maybe issues where a veteran's asking for advocacy, how do I dispute a grade without coming across as super hyper aggressive, then we can connect them with, Dr. So-and-so, who we know will be able to walk them through the process. But what I really wanted to talk about, and I'm going to invoke Dr. Wright again, when I went on board at UTSA, there was a program, the Veteran Success Collaborative, which has now morphed into the Military Affiliated Collaborative, which at this point comprised of about 50 veterans that their leadership, so it's a registered student organization now, and the leadership is employed by the department. And we actually share the leadership of the Military Affiliated Collaborative with the Recovery Center and Wellness 360. So and Wellness 360 is what they call everything. They put the clinic and mental health and counseling and all that together. And so we've got these, I guess we can call them peer mentors. It's not really what they do. It's more like I said before, the kind of point of entry and the triage team. But we have that group that's out amongst the population. We identify the faculty and staff that are veterans, and we try to show the veterans that it's not you versus us or us versus them. We're all here too. We're all integrated into the system as employees and as your fellow students.
We will have more time for questions, because we're going to keep it on track.
But actually, as I'm setting up, I do want to ask Michael a question. I want you to unpack what you said earlier about veteran is a culture, not a job status, because that's going to be a good lead into what I have to talk about.
Well, and I didn't want to steal anyone's thunder, but when we do the cultural considerations, presentations to the faculty and staff on campus, one of the things we do talk about is humor related.
Yeah.
I'm sure on other campuses you have an equivalent of a behavior intervention team where if a person kind of does something that's a little bit weird or out of the ordinary, there's an avenue where that behavior can get reported and evaluated by a group to see if any intervention is needed. One of the things that we talk about when we're discussing veteran culture is understanding the difference between morbid humor and something that legitimately is a behavior intervention team topic, right, that needs to get evaluated and someone needs some help. And so it's always eye-opening to the folks that are receiving those presentations that, y'all have a twisted sense of humor. I guess we should ask you before we start making bit reports, but that was a good question.
No, and that is perfect for what I want to talk about. Thank you so much. So my topic today is about humor, in particular Vet TV. As Jim indicated earlier, this is in no way a humorous presentation. I think one of the most tedious things in academia is a conference presentation about comedy. Right up there with starting presentation with a joke. So I'm 0 for 2. But first of all, who here has heard of Vet TV before? Before you read my abstract. Okay. And those of you with your hands up, are you veterans? Yep. No. Okay. Or affiliated with veterans. All right, that is the target audience. So let's get started. What is Vet TV? It is a comedy network made by veterans for veterans, but I want them to describe themselves. So this is from their website. Vet TV is an online streaming network that creates humor for veterans by veterans. Our content is both entertaining and therapeutic. We call it parody with a purpose. They continue. Vet TV creates targeted and therapeutic entertainment for the veteran community in order to promote camaraderie and prevent veteran suicide. In fact, after almost every show, at the end of every show, there's going to be some sort of message like this about text someone you served with and share this episode with them. They might need a laugh right now. And then sometimes this is one of the actors in character will give this a message like this. But the way they think of comedy, and in particular their target audience, is a little different. According to Vet TV founder Donnie O'Malley, veterans of this post 9/11 generation want comedy that is dark, vulgar, offensive, inappropriate, irreverent, childish, and just plain wrong. So what I want to do in this presentation is kind of explore this tension a bit. Because on the one hand, you have these very noble goals, trying to connect veterans, helping them, and preventing suicide. But you're doing it through comedy that you admit is inappropriate, irreverent, vulgar, offensive, whichever one of these adjectives you want to focus on. So first, I want to examine the claim, the connection between humor and resilience, humor and trauma. And then I'm going to kind of zoom out and talk about military humor more broadly to help situate the rest of my talk about Vet TV in particular. So humor, trauma, resilience. Humor does have potential in helping people deal with trauma, and there is a wealth of literature in psychology and social work about it. Promotes resilience, working through the trauma, from a clinical point of view, humor helps establish bonds between a therapist and a patient, but also in group situations. Other clinicians have noted that humor can be a positive coping mechanism, and Jacqueline Garrick in particular notes that veterans often have dark sense of humor and feel guilty about it. And she also says that hospital workers and other survivors of trauma often feel the same way. And what she argues is a therapist needs to work with these trauma survivors and let them understand, hey, actually, it's kind of okay that your sense of humor is a little bit weird. And in a really interesting study that was just published earlier this year, a group of researchers led veterans through what they called a comedy boot camp, where they taught them through a 7 or 8 week program to write and perform a 5-minute stand-up bit. Of course, that's not an easy task. But through writing humor and performing humor, all of these veterans reported lower levels of depression, greater self-esteem, and scored higher in normal psychological measures of resilience. So all this sounds good, but some of the research actually points to problems with that dark humor. So some researchers have pointed to that while self-enhancing humor does help, the dark humor may actually reinforce some of the self-defeating attitudes and behaviors. And also problems with emotional regulation, and often self-defeating or dark humor adds to avoidant behaviors. I don't think I need to talk about the point about connection and resilience. I think the other panelists have really covered that. But one thing about military humor is because it's so focused on the military experience, there is a inside-outside aspect to it. If you get the joke, you're in our group. If you don't get the joke, you're not. This is why so much of the military humor is also used in these initiation rituals. If you ever had, when you were a, cherry private and somebody sent you to find the Humvee keys, you were, of course, the butt of the joke. But then 8 months later, when there were new privates coming in, you were the one pulling the joke on them. So military humor also, like I said, it focuses on the ordinary, the regular aspects of military life. And the sociologist Marvin Kohler says, routine and standard operating procedure mark the military life in times of peace and become the source of much military humor in order to survive the boredom or tedium. Even in wartime, military humor will focus on the larger periods of inaction, the wasted days and years of performing duties that are unchallenging and seemingly unproductive. And I think this point alone is why we need to study military humor, because it tells us about the lives of regular soldiers, not officers, not senior people who are looking down at the rest of the military. Humor tells the lives of the people who actually are doing the grunt work. But it's also why civilians may not appreciate it. So now the most famous example, I think, military humor is Bill Mauldin, his Willie and Joe comics. This was during World War II, and I just found, while doing research for this, Mauldin grew up here in Phoenix. So he was with the troops the whole time, and he was often seen on the front lines with them. And he wrote single-panel comics to show the lives of these two grunts. In the World War II slang, they're called dog faces, called Willie and Joe. And so here's one example. Here you see Willie and Joe, and they're just looking like crap. Unshaven, disheveled. I believe this comic was written during the Battle of the Bulge. And they're miserable. The caption reads, "Joe, yesterday you saved my life, and I swore I'd pay you back. Here's my last pair of dry socks." And yes, like they've seen combat, they've seen horror, they've seen their friends die, but that little piece of comfort is what they need to get through it. Jumping forward, I mean, there's still a long history in between, but I want to jump forward to post 9/11 humor. Importantly, all these post 9/11 examples rely on online media and mobile media as well. Max Uriarte, he's a Marine Corps vet, and he started the webcomic called Terminal Lance. And he also, like Malden, focuses on the lives of two grunts. And it's a 3-panel comic, and here we have an example. See a couple Marines loaded down. The one in front says, "This sucks." And then that guy, "Well, just think of it this way. It could always be worse." Second panel, the staff sergeant. Moment of revelation. That young Marine is right. We could make this so much worse. Third panel, listen up, everyone. Put on your flak and Kevlar and stand in line at the armory and pull your weapons out. Of course, damn it. And of course, and even that guy who brought it up, he's now also looking a little disturbed. Around the same time, another Marine Corps vet, Paul Zolda, started the Duffel blog. This is an online satirical news site. It's often called the military version of The Onion. And they make satirical stories about the military and about veteran life in order to, of course, poke fun at it. So here's an example. This is an image that appeared with a headline. Typo leads to creation of a $179 million guerrilla warfare program. And we see the image is a badly photoshopped image of a guerrilla reading Field Manual 3-24 on counterinsurgency. So the whole article was actually poking fun at the Department of Defense and how groupthink and inter-service rivalries get in the way of just common sense. All right. So now that I've set the scene a bit, I'm going to talk a little more about Vet TV. So this image also comes from their website, and we see a young Lance Corporal watching something on his phone while sitting in a porta potty. But I think anybody who's been in the service knows this is staged because there's no graffiti on that porta potty. Now, I want them to, again, explain themselves. So I'm going to show a 90-second trailer. It's a commercial for the network itself.
No! Sir! Why'd you do that? I'm not gonna do that again, okay? I swear. You goddamn right you're not. Yeah, no. Who are you? I'm gonna start the tiny secretary. Hala. And she gives some top shelf head.
Get back or I'll cut in. Get back.
I am so fucking high right now! God!
But what is Vet TV for someone who doesn't know?
This is a place to come relive the military experience in a way that makes you laugh.
We are taking
Generally, civilians don't like seeing us the way we really are. We're gonna have a meeting tonight. Steve shit is. I'm playing guys kill him. Hell yeah. They don't like seeing our sense of humor because they don't understand it. No. Look, who's already sucking this CEO's cock?
Yo, dude, you're not flying. That shit's funny though. And that's why I like that TV. When you watch it, you realize that's our day-to-day life. It's just shooting and shit, laughing to get over hard times. Why'd you have to end it like this?
Wow. Yeah, I know. I came up on him like this. I didn't think he'd had the balls to do it.
I didn't think so either. He just fucking did it.
So, whoa. Sorry about that. So this is how they try to advertise themselves. Let's get started. Vet TV was started in 2016 by Marine Corps Captain Donnie O'Malley. This is actually a stage name, but I'll refer to him by it throughout this. It's streaming video on demand, and you can get it through any of the major services, Hulu, Roku, Amazon Fire, and it's in particular targeted towards post-9/11 veterans. And he sometimes extends this to veterans from the 1990s, but really this is, well, people who are, veterans who are my age and younger, so in their early 40s and younger. Currently, currently there are about 30 shows on Vet TV, dozens of hours of content. I know this doesn't sound like a lot, but these shows are actually professionally shot. The full crew, I mean, albeit limited budget, but there's a lot of working pieces to get just one episode of one show. Many of the shows follow the format of workplace comedies, except the workplace is a Marine Corps base in Afghanistan, an Army MP unit, or a battalion aid station at Camp Pendleton. They also have sketch comedy shows that are more like 5-minute sketches about Marines or soldiers, either in garrison or in the field. There's reality programming. They have a comedy news show akin to The Daily Show. They have non-comedy programming, also a documentary series called Let's Talk About the War, and also an interview show where O'Malley interviews a psychotherapist to talk about how the military changes the brain of a soldier and how you have to unlearn a lot that the military does to you. But I want to recall these claims that Vet TV makes. Comedy helps connection. Connection helps prevent suicide. We've already covered that. The target audience demands comedy is offensive, which is, of course, the wrench into all these gears. How does that work? Does that work? Perhaps the watchword of this network is politically incorrect. And most discourses around what is politically correct often involve comedy, and I just don't have the time or space to get into it. But maybe I can give you a taste of some of the jokes. I'm not going to recite jokes. It's more about the types of jokes. So jokes about killing the enemy, jokes about killing civilians, jokes about killing superior officers or each other. Since these shows mostly portray people in the infantry, mostly 18 to 24-year-old men, there's also a lot of jokes about sex, male anatomy, female anatomy, things that get you sexually aroused, being sexually aroused from killing. This requires its own Freudian analysis, which, again, not going to get into. These jokes can be, at the same time, homoerotic and homophobic, misogynistic, borderline racist, transphobic too. But to be sure, not all the jokes are like that. But we have to remember that some of the butts of the jokes of these, say, misogynistic or homophobic or transphobic jokes are themselves veterans, part of the stated target audience. So are they just supposed to ignore, like, okay, I'll let you laugh at me because this is for the greater good, or are they now on the outside? And I think this is where talking about humor through rhetorical lens, through communication studies does help us. Because humor is a communicative act, and it has one of two goals, uniting or dividing. And I'm getting close to time, so I'm just going to rush through this. But so importantly, the audience gets to decide. All communicative acts have a speaker, a message, and an audience. And Meyer here says the audience is the one that decides, is this a unifying or a dividing joke? So the joke that you find incredibly funny and you find offensive, that's okay because you decided on it and it can be the same joke. It's not me getting to say, oh, I'm sorry you were offended. So he runs through 4 different rhetorical functions. Again, it spans this unification to division, and it's all about trying to create and strengthen the group bonds or say, no, you should get out of this group. And Schumann Mondel reminds us that humor, and satire in particular, is a social and moral performance. The satirist must make decisions in order to find who is worthy of contempt, who is worthy to be made fun of. Now, sometimes this target is the ruling authorities, power structures, ideologies. In this case, humor can be incredibly subversive. But we also know satire that reinforces oppressive social institutions and value systems. These are used by the oppressors in order to keep victims at a lower status. So this is where the misogynistic, the transphobic humor fits in from that TV. In these cases, the target of the satire and mockery is sometimes transgressing the social order, and mockery and satire is used to shame them and put them back in their place, and to remind everyone else, these are the rules and you need to follow them. So Vet TV walks an interesting line here. Is it unifying? Is it dividing? Yes and no. Is it subversive? Both yes and no. But can comedy really help with resilience? And I think it can. But really, it's these connections that form. And my problem with Vet TV, it has potential, but my problem with it is because it does say some veterans count and other veterans do not. But when it avoids these openly offensive, to use their language, types of jokes, when it avoids that, it is quite good. And I am able to watch it and say, like, that's actually kind of funny. I like it. But then 5 minutes later, it's making a horrible joke, and like, I need to turn this off. One of the problems of studying this is you have to watch it a lot. So I'm going to wrap up here. Just a selection of some of my resources. Obviously not going to have time to talk about this, but just in short, in this talk, I've introduced you to a relatively new video streaming platform called Vet TV that is dedicated to making comedy for veterans by veterans. While the overall intentions and missions of Vet TV are certainly positive, that is, creating community, promoting resilience, and preventing suicide, it may not be as effective as imagined based on more recent empirical studies of humor use in clinical situations. But by looking at Vet TV from the standpoint of its rhetorical functions, and frankly all comedy needs to be looked at this, we can better see how it achieves its stated goals while possibly ruining them at the same time. I can say one wholly positive thing about Vet TV is it does do its job in undermining the Hollywood stereotype of the military and veterans, because all of us who've served, yes, some of the best people we ever met in our lives were in the military, but also some of the dumbest and worst people in our lives we ever met were also in that same unit. All right, thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes for question and answers, and we'll start, I think, if you have questions on the latest presentation on John's, and then we'll move quickly. So let's actually, Corinne, you had a question.
I did. I also have one for Michael, but I can start with John. That's fine. Yeah, that's great. Hi. How do you differentiate between sort of humor as a coping mechanism by the person sort of wielding and generating that humor, and humor as entertainment when we think about like the entertainment's ability to build resilience, as opposed to humor's ability to build resilience?
Oh, so the difference between the humorist and the audience?
Right.
Frankly, I'm a communication scholar, so I'm interested in the interaction more than anything else. I mean, as I talked earlier, like there is some research about how developing a sense of humor does help with resilience, and I found a lot of it quite interesting. So like the comedy boot camp thing, but I'm again more focused on the audience and the message itself. So I guess I'm really not drawing that distinction.
We had one over here somewhere. Should I walk this around? Do we need to do that for people?
I would like that.
Or have replacement?
Hi, I'm Dr. Yolanda Rodriguez, ophthalmic physician, veteran in the United States Marine Corps, and I also teach at CISA, Death and Dying. And I just wanted to make commentary as well. I'm glad you brought this point up as far as that TV is concerned, and Terminal Lance. Terminal Lance and Duarte and O'Malley have gone publicly head-to-head in their ideas of delivery as you know, UARTE is talking more about some of the commonalities that are truly unifying and do not select certain populations to suppress, oppress, and beat back into submission. He's talking about more unifying humor, like, the dry socks. I mean, I found that very interesting, that since the Battle of Bulge, when my father fought, to the wars that I've been involved in up to 2017, dry socks is still a common theme, which I think is incredibly unifying. However, with Vet TV and O'Malley, subjects such as military sexual trauma, homophobia, blanket parties, those types of things, and suicide over, he blew his head off, haha, it was about Danny Tide, just like what you showed. I think it can be very divisive, and I think it's very triggering for a lot of veterans. I'm also part of an online Facebook group. If you're a female Marine, join us, female veterans, female Marines and female Marines 1.0. We're 11,000 strong. And we have stepped up to Vet TV more than once. And he has shut us down again and actually turned around and created a new video that was more misogynistic and more violent.
I'm sorry.
So, I think humor is a wonderful thing. I can connect with any veteran here because of humor. And I think it's extremely unifying. So thank you so much for everything that you're saying now.
I want to respond to
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
First of all, we just definitely need to talk after this. We've mentioned this yesterday. An important thing about subjectivity with Uriarte is he's Jewish, and so those type of anti-Semitic jokes that come through from his own audience, he's quick to put those down too. And he also has a brother who's openly trans. And so again, he hears all this, vile filth from his own fans, and has found a role to okay, I need to, stop being the funny man and, lay down the law and say I am not going to accept this. But yeah, thank you for that comment.
We have a quick one back here.
I just have a quick comment, as a female Marine, as well. So, I just really appreciate what you have to say, John, because, first of all, let me introduce myself. I'm Elizabeth Crater. I'm the program coordinator for Veterans of Bricktown. In my military experience in the Marine Corps and my experience in the social service field working for veterans, not once have I seen or heard transphobia addressed openly, racism, misogyny, unless it's among other female Marines who have experienced the same things. I think that as a Black female Marine getting out of the Marine Corps, I felt very unwelcomed in other veteran organizations because this, that, and the third. And I think that's where a lot of the gaps in services that we're seeing. We keep asking ourselves, what can we do for the veterans? What can we do? There's so many people here, obviously, that want to help veterans, everyone in this room. However, these are the gaps that exist, and that this is why it's happening. So I just really appreciate that. And as I have friends who are still in, who identify as part of the LGBT community, they're facing the exact same thing, and this is what we don't talk about. So thank you.
So we do have time for one more, I think.
Not Dr. Micah Wright.
Hero of the last
So I have a comment, and I want to follow that conversation as well. So I think what's interesting about Danny O'Malley and his kind of initiatives, if you want to call it that, he's also the creator of the not-for-profit Irreverent Warriors.
Yeah, didn't even
And
get to
he runs what's called the Silky site.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's I think his strategy is taking elements of the military in order to build community in almost like a counter-public sense.
Mhm.
Something that shows its complete absence of cultural or social norms, that there is a subset of the population in the military. I would argue, although I was in the Army, but the Marine Corps, especially Marine Corps infantry, has. But kind of going from that, I think it creates this bigger conversation that needs to happen, that this divisive language exists before people even get out of the military, right? So measurement of who's the combat vet, measurement of types of service, misogyny, racism, transphobia, everything that exists within the military, right? His organization is kind of a transfer of that, right?
Yeah.
I think there is some good intention behind what he's doing, but misses the point completely with all that.
Definitely agree. Some of the shows are quite good. Like the ones that he, even though he appears in many of the programming, there are some that you know, he's just kind of like an executive producer, and the creatives are doing their own stuff, and they really lack a lot of that more grating, divisive humor. And so there is a lot of potential. It's just when you are trying to make humor for 18 to 24-year-old men, you often have a very limited understanding of what humor is supposed to be.